My mother sat in the empty room, dressed in her old but well-maintained sweater that reminded her of better times. The window was open, and the winds from the forest brought in the fresh smell of the rainy earth. On the table in front of her was a newspaper with big headlines, but she didn't even notice them. All she could focus on was the empty cup of coffee that had long since gone cold in her thoughts, which kept returning to one topic: money. As she had long ago realized that money had become a real barrier for her son John. A barrier that separated her from her grandchildren, from seeing their smiles at least once a month. All these years she was ready to give him everything she had. She supported him, helped him out, helped him when he got into difficult situations. But the more she tried to be helpful, the more he pulled away. And then, one day, she realized that she no longer had access to her own grandchildren. Why is this? Was the question that had been running through her mind for months. But the answer was on the surface. Money. It had become the thing that separated her from her family. All her attempts to improve relations seemed futile, because her son did not need her advice, her love and support. He needed her money. He never asked her for help, but somehow she realized that every time he called, he was not looking for a conversation, but for money. His words became colder, more distant. She tried to ignore these changes, hoping that it was just a phase in their relationship. But the stage became longer and longer, and she realized that without her money, she was simply being ignored. In the first call, when he tried not to talk about old issues again, but simply to ask for money for urgent expenses, came as a bolt from the blue. As always, she was ready to help. But that day she didn't even hear a grateful tone. And his whole voice sounded as if her money was only part of his plan for the next month. After that, each of her subsequent calls was as if invisible. He answered briefly, reluctantly. And that was his reaction when it wasn't about money. Tears was the last signal for her. Several more times she tried to visit him, trying to re-establish contact with his family, with her grandchildren, at least for a moment. But each time John found new reasons to keep her away from them. At first it was busy, then it was just not the right time. And in the end, he told her directly that she was no longer welcome in their home if she could not help financially. These words, which he uttered with cold ruthlessness, seemed to be a knife in her heart. How could he despise his mother like that? How could he so easily refuse a person who had given him her whole life, who had devotedly cared for him, who had sacrificed her strength and resources? She was surprised, disappointed, and at the same time felt very disappointed that she was valued only for her money. Maybe I could find some way out after all, she thought. She began to think about the situation. Her wallet was getting empty every day, and her son continued to choose his material gain, ignoring her needs. She realized that it was time for a drastic change. All these years she had been working, saving, and saving for her old age, and now money has become an obstacle between her and her closest people. All these long years she had tried to be a good mother and grandmother, helping in any way she could, but what was she really valued for? Money. And now she's sitting in her room, wondering if she should give it all to him to get some kind of answer. Am I not stuck in the trap of money? She thought. And at the same time, she felt that her chances of restoring family ties and communicating with her grandchildren were becoming increasingly dim. The mother felt that she had only one thing left to change her strategy. She could no longer afford to remain in the shadow of her son's ruthless attitude toward her help. What to do next? This question became her main concern, which did not give her peace of mind. Her financial situation was the last resource she could use. Would she reconnect with her son through money, or would it just be the final confirmation that her role in the family was limited to her financial means? It was a question that had no easy answer. And then, in that moment, she found the answer that changed everything. She decided to try to take the last step. It was her attempt to return to her family with the help of money. But would it really restore the relationship she wanted so badly? Would it change her place in her son's life? This was only the beginning of her struggle, and she still had a long way to go. But one thing was clear: money was the obstacle she would have to overcome to restore the broken ties. And will it be a step forward or an even greater distance between them? Time would tell. My mother sat on an old wooden chair in the living room, looking at the empty space where her TV used to be just a few months ago. Everything had changed so quickly. She couldn't believe that her son, who until recently had proudly put her on a pedestal, now avoided her every attempt to contact her. All these years, she had worked late into the night to provide him with the best, and now he simply turned his back when it wasn't about money. What started as a simple refusal to return her call gradually turned into a real wall. Every contact she had with her son, even through social media or SMS, caused a colder reaction from him. And although he still called when he needed something, after each call she felt rejected again and again. It wasn't just simple neglect. It was a deep sense of alienation that became her daily companion. No one could understand why the son treated his mother this way, and even he did not try to explain. She still remembered the moment when, after another refusal to help financially, John told her with words that sounded like they cut her to the boning, "Mom, I'm an adult now. You don't have to help me out. I have to make my own decisions." She tried not to give up. She continued to call, write, and invite him to her place. But every time her voice was heard on the phone, she heard only a cold answer, which she tried not to accept. No, you don't have to be in our lives just for the money," John said one day. It was a blow that made her believe that everything she had ever done for her son had only become a burden to him. All those years of sacrificing herself just didn't matter. She could not understand why things had become like this. Her mind raced with memories of the times she and John had laughed together, of him sitting on her lap, of her giving him her boundless care. How could it be that he now despised her for wanting to help? With each passing month, the mother felt him disappearing from her life more and more. She began to spend more and more time thinking about it, but no answer brought her relief. What could she do to bring her son back to her? Why did everything she had to offer turn into an obstacle? The pressure of this loneliness was getting heavier, and she began to show more and more signs that her son was not just distancing himself. He actually felt that he did not need her in his life. And his mother was constantly looking for reasons why he had changed so much, but no reason could bring her back into his heart. Her reasoning became more and more desperate. Why did money become the only currency in our relationship? These words became her internal manifesto. She realized that she would not be able to reconnect with her as long as she remained within this financial scheme he had set up for her. It seemed that even her loving support had become a burdensome dependency for John. The mother tried again and again to find the right words to explain to her son that she wanted to be more than just the source of money he had always used. But she didn't want to be just a resource. But each of her calls or letters remained unanswered or looked like formal correspondence in which he only set conditions when he needed something material. But what was the main reason for his refusals? Why did she constantly feel this tension, and why was John, who had been asking for help for years, now trying to avoid her? Deep down, she suspected that money had become an illusory barrier. She was no longer able to do what he expected of her. She couldn't support him financially on a consistent basis, and he wasn't willing to recognize her value as a mother or grandmother beyond that. John refused to allow her to have anything to do with his family. He no longer allowed her to visit his grandchildren, and he did not respond to her requests for help. And then she was left alone in her struggle, gradually realizing that her place in his life would now be whatever he wanted it to be. Maybe I should just let go. No, These words kept running through her head, although she couldn't say them out loud. She was afraid that if she let go, she would lose everything she had left. But how much more could she take? Oh, wow, that she knew now that she could not follow his wishes. She would no longer try to meet his demands or deny her own wants and needs. Maybe this path would lead to a breakup. Maybe she would still lose her son and grandchildren. But this was her chance to save herself. She gathered herself, put the phone on the table, and took a step toward the door, feeling her heart beating hard in her chest. Was this the moment when she had to take control of her life again? What would happen next? This question remained open, but what became clear was that this was not just a rejection. It was a reality that took away her last hopes of returning. My mother sat on an old sofa, looking at the empty space in front of her. Her heart was filled with disappointment and confusion. The son who was her hope a few years ago had become a stranger. She couldn't understand why things had changed between them, why her efforts had become unimportant, why she was no longer a part of his life except as a source of money. What should I do? Was the question that kept running through her mind. She tried to figure it all out, to find an answer that could explain why her son had pulled away so much. All the years she had worked to the point of exhaustion to give him the best were seemingly wasted. The money she had given him without hesitation was what drew them into the abyss of alienation. Why doesn't John reach out to her anymore? Why does his love for her seem to have disappeared? Should she look for something deeper, or was she simply not needed? She rewrote her thoughts over and over again, as if she could find at least one plausible explanation, but everything seemed empty. She even wondered if she had been too patient, too permissive in his life. Maybe her constant support had become an obstacle for him to grow up. But could she have done anything differently? If it was just a phase, she could have lived through it. But her son's rejection became a reality. And although he still turned to her when he needed money, she could feel the coldness and alienation in his every appeal. It was harder than she could have ever imagined. What do you do when fear begins to envelop your entire being? When the feeling that you are no longer needed becomes unbearable. The mother felt this feeling gradually engulf her soul, making it impossible to breathe. She was afraid that she would lose her son and grandchildren. Her heart was beating faster because she realized she had lost control. It was no longer just a question of money. It was a question of her place in the world. As she sat in the same living room she once called home and began to realize that the worst part was not that John was moving away. The worst thing was that she was not ready to face it. She had given him everything, even more than she could, and none of it mattered. This became a cruel reality for her. Maybe I was too kind, she asked herself. Maybe I should shown him that he needed to work harder on himself and rely less on me. But nothing would bring her back. She knew that. So what now? She couldn't help but think about the future. Her body was tired from the struggle. Could it withstand much more? Would she be able to find a way out without losing herself in the process? Her heart ached with the realization that even after she gave everything she had, it would not be enough. But then, in that moment, she realized that if she didn't change her attitude, there would be no hope. She could not leave her life at the mercy of a son who did not understand its value. The mother began to think about how to get out of this trap. She could not afford to stay within these walls that were no longer home. Her life could not revolve around one son. She had to find a way to change her reality, even if it meant leaving him behind. It was hard to even imagine how it could all end. She could not stay in an endless cycle of suffering and rejection. She realized that she could no longer live in the shadow of this situation. If her son does not want to be a part of her life, if she no longer has the strength to fight for him, then perhaps it is time to make a difficult decision. Is she ready to leave him behind? Will she be able to forgive his indifference and let go of everything that once connected them? She didn't know the answers to these questions. But something inside her made her move forward, albeit very slowly. The search for a way out continued. She realized that she could no longer live in hope for her son. And although she did not yet know what path she would take, one thing was clear. She could no longer stay in this cycle of suffering. The mother raised her head, and her eyes became determined. Regardless of what her son would say or what other difficulties lay ahead, she knew that this was her chance for a new life. And now she had to choose. Either she would remain in her loneliness, or she would start looking for a path that would give her new opportunities. She took a deep breath, left the room, and embarked on a new phase of her life. But her mother was sitting in a cozy coffee shop, her hands nervously clutching a cup of hot tea. The window, with dark clouds outside, reflected her thoughts. Everything that had happened in her life lately seemed unbelievable. Her son, who had once been her hope, had disappeared behind tired excuses, and now she sat here, unable to see clearly, with a heavy heart. But it was at this moment that she realized one important thing: she could no longer live hoping for a change on his part. The time to act had come. She looked at the empty cup and realized that she needed to change her reality. Every year it becomes more and more difficult to find ways to change, especially when your efforts seem futile. But at that moment, the mother felt that change was actually possible. She could start with something small. As scary as it was, she needed to stop living in fear and uncertainty. Instead of resorting to apologizing and making excuses for her son again, she began to ask herself, "Isn't it time I took responsibility for my life into my own hands?" The mother knew that unless she stopped focusing on the past, she would not be able to move forward. She couldn't stay in the same place any longer. She felt trapped. It was only with a deep breath and clarity in her heart that she realized she needed to change her approach. She would no longer wait for her son's sensitivity and support. She needed to start from scratch. But how? Anna, how can I become independent if I have lived in the shadow of others for so many years? This question kept nagging at her. However, every day her heart became more determined. So she decided that she would change her attitude towards herself. And even if it meant giving up what she knew and what was familiar, she was ready to move on. Inspired by her inner resolve, the mother realized it was time to reach out to her friends. A few years ago, she began to lose contact with most of them again. Her life had changed, but she still had a few good friends who were willing to help. Maybe I'm not completely alone anymore. She thought, reflecting on these people she could call her support. They were ready to listen to her, to help her, to give her advice. And although this step seemed scary and incomprehensible, she decided not to sit in the darkness alone. She began to think about how she could use her experience to create new opportunities. As she decided to return to something that once brought her joy, creativity. She painted and created, but then life threw her into everyday problems. Now, after hearing this from her friends, she began to realize that she could rediscover this path. Her heart was rising as she thought about the future. She started looking for courses and training in drawing that could help her develop further. She decided that despite the years, her potential was not exhausted. Although it was not easy to start from scratch when she had no one to rely on, she felt she could do it. Time passed, and the mother felt that it was really easier for her now. Every day she became more confident. She no longer saw only failure and disappointment in her life. She realized that all she had to do was take action. It might take her a long time to forget what had happened between her and her son. But she could not afford to stay in the shadow of these negative memories. She began to look at the world more broadly, to think about the possibilities rather than what she had lost. That day was a turning point for her. She realized that life could be different. Not the way she had imagined it when her son was her only support, but still no less meaningful. She felt that she still had the power to be happy. And now she was ready to fight for her place in the sun. She still had a lot of work to do, and she didn't know exactly what would happen next. But now she was ready to move forward. And she knew one thing for sure: her future was in her hands. Her mother sat in the kitchen, looking at the empty cups and listening to the clock ticking away. She heard the sound of every minute, every tick. She thought about her son, about his rejections and how things had changed between them. He no longer answered her calls, didn't show up for dinners, didn't ask what was wrong with her. All these signals were clear and did not require explanation. Now she realized that his rejection was no longer just a temporary distance. It was a rejection of her presence in his life. Her heart was beating hard when she remembered the first call he didn't answer. It happened a few weeks ago. At first she just thought he was busy, that he had a lot to do. But with each new call and each new ignoring, she began to feel that something was wrong. And of course, it was then that a fear appeared in her heart that she hadn't noticed for a long time. The distance between them was growing. My mother started checking her messages. She still hoped that this was just a temporary misunderstanding that could be resolved. But there were no answers. She knew that he had received her messages, but he just wasn't responding. Instead of picking up the phone, or at least writing a few words, he left her alone with her thoughts. The last time she tried to talk to him, for the first time, she didn't even get a standard "okay" or "thank you." He simply said that he had no time for such trifles, and that he was busy with his own affairs. And these words became the moment when the mother realized that she no longer wanted to hold on to something that had no future. That she sat in an empty room, feeling pain, but she could no longer afford to let it dictate her emotional state again. Instead of being sad or resentful, she decided that there would come a time when she would make a choice for herself, even if that choice would lead to a permanent end to her relationship with him. She found it difficult to understand why he had pushed her away at the time when she needed his support the most. She could not answer this question, and perhaps she would never find the answer. It was painful for her to think about it, but she realized that her son had grown up and no longer needed her as much as he used to. He obviously no longer cared how she felt. But even in the midst of this overwhelming pain, she made a decision she would no longer try to be the one who always forgives, who is always ready to help, who is always trying to find an explanation, and she no longer wanted to be just a mother, who would always come to the rescue, even when she was ignored. The mother realized that their relationship was no longer what it used to be, and it was hard to accept. At the time when she had given her whole life to raise and provide for him seemed to have been wasted. She began to doubt herself, wondering where she had made a mistake. The more she tried the point where everything started to fall apart, when he became so indifferent. Was it my fault that he became like this? These thoughts haunted her. But in the end, she realized one thing: you can't blame yourself for something you can't change. She couldn't change his attitude, and she couldn't control his decisions. And even if it hurt, she had to admit that this stage of their relationship was over. The last time the mother dialed her son's number, she felt that she could no longer hope for it. She told herself that she would no longer wait for an answer. She didn't have to suffer anymore because she couldn't find answers to her questions. She realized that her life was more than her relationship with her son. And even though it was hard, she decided to move on. Ethopeda will no longer wait for his calls. I will no longer run away from the pain. I will no longer pay attention to his rejections. These words sounded so firm and clear from her lips for the first time. She realized that her life was not just about him. And these words became her new beginning. She took a deep breath and gathered her things, preparing for a new stage. This did not mean that she had forgotten everything that happened, but it did mean that she was now ready to make her own decisions, regardless of what was happening in her family. And even if her son was no longer a part of her life, she was ready to move on, opening new doors for herself. Her decision was unpopular, but it was the right one. Although there was still pain, she knew that her path was now open, and she could become the person she had always wanted to be. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling with excitement. She replayed what had happened recently over and over in her mind. Her son, whom she had raised and given all her strength to, no longer wanted to see her, and it was hard to accept. But now she knew that she could not remain passive. It was time to act. A few weeks passed from the moment she realized that her son had drifted away. At first it was just ignoring calls, then ignoring texts. With each new, didn't answer. With each, no time. She felt her world gradually crumbling. But the worst part was that she couldn't understand why. She thought he just didn't have enough time or was going through a difficult period in his life. But none of that mattered anymore. She was on the verge, and now she had to make a decision. That moment came when she decided to ask her sister for help. She knew that even though she was very busy, she was the last person she could trust with her feelings. The conversation with her was difficult, because the mother did not want to admit even herself that her son was abandoning her. But her sister was the support she needed right then. She listened to her, gave her advice, and even agreed to help her if she needed it. That help was so unexpected and needed that the mother felt a little relieved. And it was thanks to her sister that she decided she would no longer sit in the shadows. She had to find a way to resolve the situation. In the morning, she already knew what she was going to do. She picked up her cell phone, looked at the screen, but did not dial her son's number. Something was stopping her, but she realized that the more she delayed, the more she would be distancing herself from him, and she knew that every next attempt at contact was her last chance. So she decided to act. The photo of her son, which she had looked at so often with love, and her eyes reflected everything she was feeling: pain, fear, but also hope. Hope that she could still make a difference. She dialed the number. The phone rang several times, and it was at that moment that her heart began to beat faster. She knew it would be difficult for him to answer, but she had to hear his voice. She didn't know what those few phrases would say, but every sound in the phone was important. He picked up the phone, and it was even scarier than she could have imagined. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded flat, without emotion. Hi, she replied, trying to collect her thoughts. "How are you?" "I'm fine," was his short and disinterested reply. The mother felt everything inside her shrink. She could no longer tell him that she needed his support, that her heart was hurting because he was moving away. She couldn't dump all her feelings on him, it would be too hard. So she decided to say only one thing: "Son, I want to see you. Can you come? I need your help." His answer was not what she had hoped for. "Mom, I'm too busy right now. I'll call you when I have time." At this point, she realized that it wasn't just no time. It was a refusal. His words held no hope. Her heart was breaking, but she said it anyway. "Okay, son, I'm waiting." She put the phone down, and the room fell silent. This silence was heavier than any word. Her rejection became clear. She realized that even his words, spoken from a distance, no longer had the power to change the situation. She had lost everything. And now that she knew that her son refused to help her, she could no longer remain a victim. Her last attempt had been in vain, but that did not mean she had to give up. She could no longer be the one who always waited for others to make moves. She took a deep breath and gathered all the strength she could to get out of this situation with her head held high. Her journey did not end with her son's refusal. She was ready to take action and create her own future, even if he wasn't around. She realized that again and again she would be forced to act on her own, even if it meant leaving her son in the past. She lifted her head and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes reflected more than just disappointment. They sparkled again with hope for a new beginning, even though she didn't know where that path would lead her. But now she was ready to move forward. The next few days after the mother decided to take action and no longer wait for her son's help were full of reflection and uncertainty. Though she knew that she had to continue living without his support, but at the same time she was deeply puzzled as to why her son, whom she loved so much, had become so indifferent. A storm of emotions was brewing in her soul, but she tried not to lose her composure. It was hard for her, but she was ready to live without his manipulations. And then one day, when she had already gotten used to the silence in the house, when every moment without him seemed less difficult, she received a call. The number was familiar, and the mother's heart sank. It was him, her son. But this time, she was ready for this call. "Hi, Mom." His voice was calm, but with a hint of forced concern. "I've been thinking about our conversation for a long time. I want to talk to you." Hearing his voice, his mother felt her heart start to beat faster again, but she tried not to give away her feelings. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "Mom, I understand. You feel hurt, but let's talk about it. Maybe I misunderstood something. I'm going through a difficult time, but I don't want you to suffer," her son said, his words seemingly filled with regret and remorse. Mother felt his words trying to penetrate her heart, but she was no longer as nervy as she had been. She was silent for a moment, her mind struggling with the emotions that were trying to break through to the surface. She was no longer ready to allow herself to give in to these illusions. She remembered how difficult it had been to gather herself after the last rejections and calculate all the options, how she had suffered from his every cold reaction. I don't want to discuss anything if you're not ready to change," she replied calmly, although she sounded a little tired. "I'm not going to take your indifference anymore." "Mom, don't say that." His tone became a little more insistent. "Just tell me what you want, and I'll do it." Her son's words struck her. They were not sincere. She felt that it was an attempt to manipulate her feelings. The mother knew that he didn't just want to regain her trust. He was trying to make her believe in his ability to change, and then use her desire to help to take what he needed from her again. He continued, "You know I can't be there all the time, but if you want, I will help you. Just tell me what you want. I could find money for you, solve everything. You know I love you." These words sounded like a cold shower to her. But he said it as if he was ready to meet any of her demands, but only on the condition that she agreed to his terms. My mother could no longer believe him. It was another attempt to manipulate her emotions and take advantage of her needs to achieve his goals. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, trying not to give in to his words. "You want my money, don't you?" His silence on the phone said more than any words. He realized that she was on to him. His mother could see him getting nervous, but he had no choice but to continue his game. "Mom, don't be like that. I just want to help," he said, sounding a little irritated. "You know it's hard, but I am ready to help you if you accept my help." The mother felt defeated, but now she knew exactly what to do. Her instincts told her that this was not about helping, but about control. Her son wanted her to depend on him again, to use her kindness and naivety to his advantage. I don't need your help, son," she replied firmly, feeling her strength begin to return to her. "I will not give in to your persuasion anymore." These words were a release for her. She felt herself taking control of her life again. Although her son tried to manipulate her, she did not give in. She was stronger than he thought. And now she realized that it was not love, it was only a need for her resources, for her support. My mother put the phone down and took a deep breath. She no longer had any illusions about who her son really was. This call was the last straw for her, and she knew she had to move on. She would no longer allow him to use her, even under the guise of help. Now there was only one thing left for her to move forward. The mother sat at her old desk, the shadows from the lamplight playing on her face. It seemed to her that everything around her began to spin into a circle from which there was no way out. She thought again about her son and how everything had changed. Her heart was beating with sadness, and the question that had been tormenting her lately was running through her mind. Was it worth putting everything in her power into this enslavement? On the one hand, she realized that she had done everything she could. She sacrificed her time and energy trying to support her son and provide for his family. But on the other hand, she felt like this continuous process of giving had become her burden. A few days after she had cut the last ties, her son called again. This time, his voice was softer than usual, almost pitiful. "Mom, I can't do this without your help. I don't know what to do. I have serious problems with money, and I just can't get out of this situation without your support," he said, as if he didn't realize that his words sounded like he already knew the outcome of this conversation. The mother was silent for a few seconds. Her heart still beat faster, but now she felt different. She remembered all those years when every time she helped, it turned into a new manipulation. She didn't want to be part of this game anymore. "Mom, please, I just need your money. If you don't help me, I don't know how to go on living. I will find ways to help you in the future, but only now. It's very important to me. I can't even pay the utility bills," he continued, his voice so full of helplessness that she could hardly resist. It was the last thing she could stand. All of his appeals were the same as before about money, about his failures, and about his needs that he wanted to satisfy at her expense. I've always helped you," she said, trying not to lose her dignity. "But I can't let you use me anymore. You have to solve your problems yourself." But this was not the final answer her son expected. His voice became harsher, even a little rough. "You don't understand, Mom. There's a reason for this. If you don't help me, I won't be able to take it anymore. I'll lose everything I have. You don't want me to end up on the street, do you?" This was something she had heard several times before. He was again trying to put her in front of a choosing money or her son, her love or her peace. Unethical mother felt her heart begin to tremble with tension. But this time she was not ready to give in. "I will not help you anymore," she said, firmly and decisively. "You have to decide for yourself what to do with this." But the son did not give up. "Don't you love me?" His words were ruthless, as if they contained nothing but cold calculation. The mother felt her heart sink into darkness again, but she was ready to hold on. She knew that her love and her money should no longer become tools for manipulation. The son fell silent, and the silence on the phone grew heavier. The mother knew that her decision was final. She could not afford to remain a part of this endless manipulation. Her son had to understand that money was no substitute for a sincere relationship, and that he could not manipulate her love. Meanwhile, her son remained impressed by her determination. The mother was no longer under the illusion that this call would change everything. And she knew that he would stay on the line, that he would expect her support. But her role in this drama was no longer so important. "You did it, Mom," he said, a chill of desperation in his voice, "and I will remember it." But his mother did not answer. She simply hung up the phone and felt this heavy stone on her soul disappear. She decided not to let herself be trapped by it anymore. And although her heart remained sad with disappointment, she knew that this was the only right answer. She realized that she had just begun her journey to independence. She would no longer wait for her son to change. She had to learn to live for herself, not for those who used her kindness and support for their own gain. She decided to start a new chapter in her life, even if it meant leaving her son in the shadow of her decisions. Her heart no longer trembled with fear or pain. She knew that these moments were necessary for her to realize who was really around her and what her relationship with them really looked like. It was the last blow that was the beginning of a new life for her. Her mother stood at the window, looking out at the night city, which stretched out before her like an endless ocean of possibilities. She felt the gentle coolness of the evening air touching her skin. All those years she had spent trying to be needed, trying to give, as if that wasn't enough. But now, standing here, she realized that everything had changed. Sometimes, in order to maintain your dignity, you have to leave free choice to others, even if it hurts. She did not know what would happen next. Her heart could not accept the final fact that her son had left her without support. But at the same time, she was no longer ready to give him everything again. All these years her life had been revolving around his needs, his desires. And now she was on the verge of changes that gave her neither peace nor confidence. She remembered her son's last words, "You did it, Mom." For some time, they did not leave her mind, making her heart beat faster every time. Could she have done anything differently? Should she really have continued to help, even if it meant leaving herself exhausted? The answer was clear. Now she had to realize that her life had value, even without being everyone's rock. And a few weeks passed, and her son did not call again. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was all temporary. He had to understand her decision and accept it. But time passed, and the feeling of incompleteness remained. Every day she felt more and more anxious, but also happy that she was no longer a slave to this situation. Now she began to think about herself. And although her conscience still haunted her sometimes, she realized that without deep change there would be no real growth. She was at a crossroads, but she felt that this uncertainty was her choice. She was the decisive force in her life. After many hours of lonely reflection and weighing, the mother realized that she had to start a new chapter. She was not ready to return to the old relationship where money was a tool of manipulation. She no longer wanted to be part of the circle where her every gesture or sacrifice was taken for granted. And although it was hard, although she felt loss and pain, she still decided to leave the choice to her son. She sat down at her desk and dialed the phone. There was no longer that fear of being used again. She could feel her hands no longer trembling. There was no despair in her words, only cold determination. "Hello, son," she said. Her voice was calm, even a little distant. "I want you to know that I will no longer help you financially. I have made my choice, and I know it is the right one." The mother was silent, giving her son time to answer. She no longer expected him to change his attitude. She was no longer ready for emotional manipulation or to become the person who wanders in the shadow of other people's desires again. "Mom, are you serious?" Finally, she heard her son's voice. But his words no longer contained the ruthless stubbornness she had heard before. Now it sounded more like surprise. "I'm serious. I did what I had to do, and you have to accept it," she said, leaving no room for further argument. The son was silent. The mother could hear his voice fading on the other end. She waited, but could not understand what he was feeling now. Was he disappointed? Or maybe he realized that he could no longer manipulate her emotions. Meanwhile, she no longer asked herself if she was right. She knew that only now had her decision become the right one. And although the choice to leave him without support was difficult, she realized that it was not the end. It was a new beginning for her. After this conversation, the mother felt her shoulders lighten as the burden she had been carrying for years gradually decreased. She was no longer financial support. She was a woman who decided to start again. She had her life, her dreams, and her dignity. And although there was no end to this story, this moment became a new page. The mother was ready to live by her own rules. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but there was no more fear, only new opportunities. She left the choice to her son, who had to decide what to do next.